welcome to this month's edition of To Talk. Our guest today is Congressman Barry Loudermilk. Congressman Loudermilk represents the 11th Congressional District, which includes a major portion of the southern part of District 2, specifically the Cumberland and the Vinings area. The congressman began his public service in the Georgia House of Representatives, serving for 6 years, and then was elected to the Georgia State Senate, serving for 2 more years. As a member of Congress, he currently serves on the U.S. House Committee for Homeland Security and Science, Space, and Technology. He is also a member of the Homeland Security Committee's Task Force on Combating Terrorism and Foreign Fighter Travel. Representative Loudermilk served in the U.S. Air Force for 8 years and is a lieutenant colonel in the Civil Air Patrol and former commander of the Georgia Legislative Squadron. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule.
Well, it's my pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, and recently you just opened your new office, and so we thought it was a great opportunity to folks to get to know you and hear a little bit about what's going on in Washington. A lot of stuff going on up in the House, particularly with reforming the agenda and a little bit of cultural change. You want to tell folks a little bit about that?
Well, most everyone is aware we're looking at a change in the leadership of the House of Representatives, with Speaker Boehner announcing that he's retiring, not only from being the Speaker of the House, but also from Congress. And so we thought we were going to have an election of a new candidate for Speaker last week, but at the last minute, Kevin McCarthy decided to not run, and we decided it was best to postpone the elections.
Been a lot of surprises in a very short period of time.
There has, and I'm encouraged by this. A lot of people are calling it chaos, and things are willy-nilly, as I've heard, in the House of Representatives. But in reality, if you look, it's very encouraging what's happening. We've had a situation to where the American people are speaking and their voice is being heard in Washington. If you look at why did Boehner step down, it wasn't because a few people were pushing him in the House. It happened, his decision to step down came after a month-long recess to where we were all back in our districts, and the American people were tired of the direction that America is going. They've expressed that many times. We need to go in a different direction. It just hadn't felt like the House was doing enough, the pushing an agenda, and so many members of Congress came back, knowing that there was a resolution to potentially bring up a vote to replace Boehner. Many congressmen, even some close to the Speaker himself, came back and said, look, the American people are really frustrated, and I think it's time for a change. So that change was as a result of the American people speaking out. So we're at a point now, we're wanting to slow that process down. Boehner says he will stay as long as he needs to until we figure out who the Speaker is. But I think it's more important that we look at the process, the rules that govern the House of Representatives. I think changing those is more important to changing the culture in the House than it is just changing the Speaker.
And I think folks on the local level understand that too, because there's probably a lot of discussion here at the county level about process and procedure.
When you look at the way that the founders envisioned government to be, especially at the federal level, in the original Constitution, the Senate, the legislative branch was the most powerful branch. That all laws that affect people were to come out of the legislative branch.
And that's where basically you control the purse strings, as people hear.
Exactly.
Right.
And we've seen a change in that. First of all, with the 17th Amendment, it changed the way that the Senate was elected. Originally, the Senate was elected by the state legislatures. So the Senate, they represented the will and the interest of the state governments, where the House was the people's house.
Right.
And it represented the will and the interest of the people from their districts. But what we've seen in the shift in culture is that instead of each individual congressman being empowered, let's say I have a great idea to help get rid of our debt, which is one of the things
right.
we have
which is huge.
We have to deal with, and I could get 200 people to co-sponsor a bill to deal with that, I should be able to move that forward. But the way the culture changed in the House is you had one person or an office, a staff member in the Speaker's office, determining what bills actually move forward or not.
There really was this artificial power structure set in place that was preventing you from representing your people.
Exactly. And, so the closer you were to the decision maker, the more chance you had of getting things done. It's not the way the founders envisioned it. Every member of Congress represents a constituency, and they're the mouthpiece of that constituency to the federal government. So we're stepping back a little bit, slowing down the process, and in fact, tomorrow when I go back to Washington, D.C., we're having a meeting that is about what do we need to address, what rules changes do we need to make to empower the individual members of Congress to build a bottom-up approach to the organization instead of top-down.
Do you think that there's a majority? What is it? 218 would be the majority. Is there a majority that kind of agrees with you?
I believe so. More and more are speaking out. Even some committee chairmen that surprised me after I made mention of this to the media. Others started talking about it as well. And I'm not saying I started it, but I think many people were already thinking this. And we had committee chairmen standing up in one of our meetings saying, look, we need to change the way that the committee process works. Right now, it's pretty much the speaker that has the influence of who's on what committee and who the chairmen are. And some of the sitting committee chairmen said, you know, we should elect the committee chairman by the members of the committee.
So now is the committee chair, is that a seniority thing, or is that really just kind of the favor of the speaker?
It's pretty much decided by the speaker, by whatever protocol the speaker wants to use. Now, we have a steering committee, and the committee is made up by representatives from different regions that's represented in the Republican conference. We need to readdress those regions, so there's the SEC states, you may say, are better represented. Mm-hmm. It also has all the committee chairmen, but the way it's done is the speaker has many more votes than a committee member.
Okay.
And so we're proposing everyone has one vote because, you know, when the speaker has many more votes than an individual person, he can override most everyone.
So, you know, besides just a reform to the agenda of how the House operates, you're really talking about a culture change.
We are. And that's what I think people want, is to change the culture of Washington, D.C. We've been governing crisis to crisis to crisis. We're not taking a long-term approach to things. We're not effectively fighting the administration on the failed policies of this administration, and which empowers him. And it also empowers the regulatory agencies, which I believe have grown into a fourth branch of government.
Well, it does seem like there's a whole lot more activity coming out of like the different, like the EPA and some things like that, you know, you would have thought were reserved to Congress.
Absolutely. And the congressional power, the authority under Congress by the Constitution, as you mentioned, is the power of the purse, number one. Number two is its investigatory power, being able to investigate, to hold in compliance the other branches of government, including the regulatory agencies. Through the series of continuing resolutions, we have given up the power of the purse, because every time we do a continuing resolution, it's basically a blank check to the administration saying, well, we disagree with all of your policies, we disagree with the direction you're going, but since we're not able to go through our regular budgeting process, then we're just going to write you a blank check and you continue what you're doing, even though we disagree with it. And we keep getting put into these positions. Well, it's a crisis. If we don't pass a CR, we're going to shut down the government. Well, we need to get back to what we call regular order. Passing a budget, passing the appropriations, that re-empowers Congress with the power of the purse.
Now, you know, we talk about culture change within the Republican Party, but how do you deal with the other side of the aisle?
Well, I think all in all, they're going to want the same thing. When you look at Congress as an institution versus the other branches, regardless of power, we have an institutional obligation. And there's quite often issues that both parties agree upon. Now, one of the problems is such a divide between the Democrat and the Republican Party now, mainly because the Democrat Party nationally speaking has moved much further to the left of the political spectrum.
Do you think, though, that some of that is with the upcoming election next year, or is that philosophical change?
I think there's a little bit of both. There's a philosophical change on the national scene, more by those who influence the Democratic Party. It's a little different on the local level. Of course, the closer you get to the people, things are not quite as drastic.
Well, yeah, and speaking about getting close to the people, and I know that's why you have recesses besides the holidays, but do you think that the general populace is as divided as Congress sometimes appears?
They probably are not as divided as many think they are. Because if we were to put folks in a room, and something I'd like to talk about before we're done is a vision of where we're going. If we were to bring everybody, in fact, I did this week. I was speaking at one of the larger employers in the Atlanta area, and they brought several of their employees in, and we were just talking about the culture of Washington and how we're going to change things. And I started talking about if we all have the same idea, the same vision of where we're going in this nation, we tend to agree. And we break that partisan divide. For instance, with this audience, I said, how many of you in this room think that the government having an $18 trillion debt is a good idea? No one raised their hand. So then I said, how many of you think that we need to address paying off this debt. They all raised their hand. And this was a bipartisan group. And so we all agreed that we need to get rid of the debt. Well, instead of the way the culture operates now is we immediately focus on a tactic instead of an overall strategy to do it. So we can all agree, yes, we've got to address the debt. Now let's look at when do we need to get that debt taken care of. We can't do it overnight. It's impossible. But if we can do it by the year 2030, all right, let's build a plan of how are we going to reduce our deficit spending and how are we going to eliminate the debt. Now we talk about what we have to do piece by piece to get there, and we get better buy-in.
But don't you think, I mean, I agree, but don't you think that when you start talking about how you're going to do it, I mean, everyone, I think, is for reducing the debt and, you know, kind of getting back to the way things should be. But when you start going, okay, well, this is where we're going to have to cut, isn't that where we start getting the divide?
That's when we start getting the divide, but the problem we have right now is we immediately focus on the tactic and we divide ourselves before we even look at where we're going.
So you're saying get consensus among the group that, you know, this is absolutely what we need to do.
Exactly.
And then kind of working on getting the consensus on how we're going to do it.
How we're going to get there and then how long it's going to take to get there. Because I think everyone will agree we've got to do it by a certain time. Okay, now you lay the facts on the table. And there's only, you know, the facts don't lie.
Yeah, but there's only so much money.
There's only so much money. How are we going to get there? Now let's together decide. Now you're always going to have a division and the majority is going to win.
Sure.
But we do bring the ideas to the table, and when you're bringing everybody to the table and you're looking at the facts, this isn't hyperbole, this is the truth. We have an $18 trillion debt, we cannot sustain it. How do we take care of it? Well, here are our options, and then we vote on those options. I equate it to the story of the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness. Why were they willing to wander in the wilderness for 40 years? Because they knew at the end there was a land of milk and honey. Yeah. If you know where you're going, the people are more willing to put up with some sacrifice and some discomfort to get there.
Well, then that kind of brings us to a vision. So let's hold that thought, and let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll resume the discussion.
Hey, you! Pay attention. This is your frozen holiday turkey, and this is your fryer full of boiling oil, and this is your frozen holiday turkey in the boiling oil. So now what we got? Your turkey is burnt, your fryer's ruined, and maybe you set your house on fire. Get the point? Don't do this. Be sure your bird is completely thawed before frying, and never put too much oil in your fryer. Always fry outdoors and away from anything that might catch on fire. Be sure to keep children and pets away from your fryer, and finally, always read your owner's manual for proper setup and safety tips. On behalf of Campfire, have a happy and safe holiday season.
Welcome back, and those of you just joining us, with me is Congressman Barry Loudermilk. And before the break, we were talking about some new direction for the House of Representatives and for the Republican Party. And Barry, we were talking before the break about a vision, and you mentioned that, you know, if you're going to get the agenda reformed or the party going in the right direction, you have to have a vision. So let's talk about what your vision is and what you think the direction that we need to go.
Well, it's important to have a vision. If you look at where we are, I had dinner with the majority leader a couple of months ago, and we were sitting and we were talking about where we were as a nation, you know, where we needed to go. And he brought up the point, he said, if you look at 1979, economically and socially and where we are in this nation, it's very similar. We were cutting the military drastically. The morale was extremely low. Budget cuts. Russia had invaded another nation and we did nothing to stop it. The same thing has happened here. Well, then it was the Soviet Union.
Sure.
Iran held hostages that we did nothing to stop it. And Iran has 4 hostages now. That amazes me that those 4 American hostages were not even part of the negotiation in the nuclear deal here. So you could go through all these issues, about 25, 30 issues that are identical today as they were then. What changed was when Ronald Reagan came in, he brought in a vision. He said, this is what America should be. This is, he called it the shining city on a hill.
Well, he gave people hope.
He did, but he also pointed them in a direction, said, this is where we're going. Imagine that you don't have to be afraid of the Soviet Union launching a nuke at us. Imagine in America that our military is so strong that there is peace through strength, that no one will even think of messing with the United States. Imagine where your children can go to a playground and you don't have to be worried about somebody giving them something. This is what he implanted in people's mind, and I think we're at the same place to where we have to very articulately define where we're going in this nation. Take the debt, for instance. Imagine a nation without debt. Now, if you look at how great this debt is we have never faced anything as spectacular.
18 trillion is a big
18
number.
trillion is huge. I mean, if you go back, just to put it in perspective so you understand how much it is. It's not a religious statement at all, but if you know what today's date is, you know historically when Jesus was born, right? So if you were to go back to the moment of the birth of Jesus and you put $16,000 in the bank every minute since the birth of Christ, you still wouldn't have $18 trillion today.
Wow.
That's how massive
kind of a
18
different
trillion.
perspective.
It is. Just the interest payment we paid on the debt in the last fiscal year was enough to buy 3,000 F-35 fighters. Now imagine what it would do to our local economy if we gave Lockheed right here that much money to build 3,000 F-35s. What would it do to our defense posture? All that is money that we're giving away right now, paying on interest on this credit card. So we know we have to deal with it. Well, imagine a nation without a debt by the year 2030. We can't erase it tomorrow, but it's going to take probably 15 years to effectively decrease our spending and apply the revenues today.
So how do you get all the sides together? I mean, I think everyone would agree, like we talked earlier before the break, that when everybody raises their hand saying yes, we need to reduce the debt. So how do you think we get there?
Well, I think first of all we realize we have to take a breath. We have to come up with a plan. Now, our plan that we've started working on in our office is a constitutional amendment to require Congress to operate under a balanced budget. States do it, counties do it. Why does the federal government have the ability to spend itself into oblivion?
And some say it's because they print the money.
Well, and that is part of the issue. Now, Thomas Jefferson, of course, he wasn't at the Constitutional Convention. He was an ambassador to France at the time. When he actually read the Constitution, he thought it was great, except for, he said, there's one fallacy here. There was no limit on the amount of money that Congress can borrow and spend. So many have supported a constitutional amendment. Across the nation right now, people are demanding Congress have a balanced budget. If you do it legislatively, we'll just suspend it, just like we're going to do with the debt ceiling coming up, suspend it. So it has to be a constitutional amendment.
But now typically constitutional amendments, it takes 3/4 of the states. I mean, that's
right.
a long process.
It is. But you don't have to complete the process to have it take effect. For instance, there's been many balanced budget amendments proposed in Congress. Mostly Congress won't pass them because it's handcuffing Congress. You're taking power away. But yet, Congress is hearing the voice of the American people. You better be financially responsible.
So maybe now is the time is a little bit different.
It's a little bit different, but still, Congress is very good at kicking the can down the road. So what we're proposing is a constitutional amendment that requires Congress to operate under a balanced budget by a certain date. Let's say if we did it this year, that would be 2030.
Okay.
All right, you have members of Congress wanting to be responsible to the outcry of the people. Yes, you have to have a balanced budget. But yet, many of them won't be here when it goes into effect. So what we're doing is allow Congress to kick the can down the road, but we're putting a backstop. Now, some people are saying, no, we have to have it sooner than that. But if you think back to Ronald Reagan asked for a balanced budget amendment. He even asked for the states to pass one through Article 5, another option instead of Congress doing it. Now imagine if we had that in place 20 years after Reagan. We wouldn't be in the debt crisis we're in now.
We wouldn't have the big debt we have now.
But it also becomes a catalyst. If we do it by, let's say, the year 2030, it becomes a catalyst for a lot of other things we need to do. Social Security reform, Medicare reform, Medicaid reform, tax reform. All of these things that we've been talking about doing, that becomes a catalyst because now we know we have to balance the budget by that date and start addressing the debt. Now that becomes the catalyst that forces Congress to act instead of kicking the can further down.
How does the public feel secure that all right? So we set a date for 2030. So we have 15 years from now, but congressional terms are 2 years.
Right.
And so the way that the people hold their representatives, whether it be at the local level like myself or or the national level is by elections.
Right.
But if it's something that doesn't have to happen for 15 years, how do we get Congress to come together and do something so that by 2030 it's balanced, not, oh, this is 2030, we have to balance it this year?
Well, it's partly the people holding us accountable, but let's take, for instance, Tom Price is the chairman of our budget committee. He's doing a tremendous job. In fact, he laid out a budget this year that would have us balanced within 10 years.
Okay.
The thing that will happen, though, is that won't carry from Congress to Congress to Congress.
Sure.
Okay, the next Congress, I mean, it could be that neither Tom or I are there. We hope that's not the case, but there could be somebody else there. Democrats could be in charge, and they totally change the budget. But if you have a constitutional amendment that says by this date, constitutionally you have to, then that becomes the catalyst to make sure whoever is there still has to follow a path that balances the budget by that time.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a big job, and I'm glad that we don't have to deal with something that big here. But I want to thank you for joining the show today and sharing your insights on the challenges that face the nation.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for your service here as well.
Well, you're welcome. That's it for this month. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next month.
Welcome home, man. Each year, our children are put at risk by drivers who ignore bus stop arms and warning lights. In Cobb County alone, more than 1,000 drivers ignore them every day. The Cobb Police Department and Cobb Schools have partnered with Operation Stop Arm to educate drivers about the new law to save lives.
Tragically, a young child was killed at a bus stop by a passing car in 2009.
While we were being interviewed by the news crew, a driver ran through the stop arm of the bus.
We had just installed new stop arm cameras on some of our buses and were able to hand the photo over to law enforcement. And now, with the new law, hopefully we will reduce violations of the stop arm law and have additional evidence to cite violators.
Drivers who pass a school bus with a stop arm activated can receive up to a $1,000 fine from the court and get 6 points tacked onto their driver's history. It is a serious offense.
So next time you're in a hurry and you're tempted to pass a stopped school bus,
your face for the first time, I wondered how your life had been. Had anybody held you or loved you, or had they never noticed you there? What are you doing here? If your eyes could cry, I'd see a tear. The sadness that I see, you're coming home.
Why are you turning in this dog?
Be the best of friends.
Well, we're moving.
How long have you had the dog?
11 years.
You understand the dog will likely be put down?
Yeah.
I'll need you to complete the surrender if you would, please. You're giving up all rights to the dog. Are you okay with this?
Both my eyes have filled with tears, knowing one will find a home, leaving others fate unknown, killing our best friends. There's only so much one can do, that's why I'm out here asking you.
Did you want to keep the collar?
I don't think so.
Don't run away from your fear. That lovers need to learn and finally be concerned. They're killing our best friends. There's only so much one can do, that's why I'm out here asking you. How can you help me?
Every year, in Metro Atlanta alone, nearly 90,000 unwanted animals are put to death. It is epidemic and unnecessary. The problem can be fixed. Spay and neuter your animals. The time to act is now. Stop the needless killing. Please help us. www.mostlymutts.org.
But it would be safe to keep your distance until there's no secret that makes you smile. Reliable sources say that chicken soup has found their way out of this here. Dangerous, but it's until they are returned.
Getting closer to nature can get you closer to your family. Go to discovertheforest.org.